Hi, if you're new to my channel, welcome. If not, welcome back. Today's video is going to be about overcoming creative blocks. Hopefully this video will be helpful for anyone from game masters trying to come up with a new adventure for their group, to writers, to illustrators, poets, architects, whoever happens to be involved in a creative endeavor who has run into a block and doesn't know how to easily overcome it. I'm going to cover several pieces of advice and techniques that have helped me in the past overcome creative blocks that I have run up against. And I'm going to start with the more obvious ones that you may have heard before, and as we go through the video I'm going to get to the ones that are maybe ones you haven't heard and are a little better. So stay tuned for those. Alright, the first piece of advice is going to be just do it. I know you've heard this before, but when it comes right down to it, the difference between people who actually get things done and people who wish they had got things done, it doesn't matter if it's creative endeavor or mowing the lawn, are the people that just go ahead and hunker down and do it. They quit finding excuses to not to, and they just do it. If you allow procrastination or perfectionism to keep you from doing it, all you're going to have is regrets in the end. Now, things that cause procrastination can be things such as, well, for one, perfectionism in and of itself, because, oh, I'm not ready yet. I don't quite know what I want to do with this part or that part of it, whatever the case may be. I don't think I've got this part figured out. Perhaps even, well, I don't have time to really tackle it all at once today. And a lot of these things I'm going to touch on later on in later techniques and pieces of advice on how to overcome them. I don't feel like it's another big one. You know, oh, I don't feel great today. I'm hungry. I'm just feeling like I'm dragging. I'm a little bit queasy, whatever. You know, I can understand if you've got a migraine and you want to just be in a dark room and yeah, you can't sit in front of a blank page and write or draw or sculpt or whatever. Or say you're so sick that you can't be more than 5 feet away from the toilet because you're running out both ends at equal speeds. Yeah, that is not an excuse. That is an actual reason to delay doing something. But if it's just, I don't know, I just don't feel great today. You know what'll make you feel great? Accomplishing something. So kick yourself in the butt. I have to do this to myself all the time. Kick yourself in the butt and just do it. Just sit down and do it. And on the subject of procrastination, remember, video games, TV, social media, while you're working on a project, these are your enemies. I don't watch a whole lot of TV anymore. A couple of times a month I may sit down mainly to spend time with my wife, but I pretty much give up on TV. I do spend way too much time on social media. That's one of the things that I've got to, I talked earlier about kicking myself in the butt. That's one of the things I got to kick myself in the butt on sometimes, is quit fooling around on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. These things are only distractions that serve to keep you from starting or finishing your project. So when you've got a project you want to work on, just go ahead and cut way back or cut them out of your life completely, at least for a short while. Now, getting into perfectionism. Nothing's ever perfect. Like making this video. I tried to make it last week and I was trying to follow this piece of advice, but I had not done my setup properly. So my microphone was set wrong and it sounded like I was whispering at it the whole time. And that was fairly upsetting, especially considering the idea I was trying to get across in the video. But if you have done your prep work to a reasonable amount, everything doesn't have to be perfect for you to start. As a matter of fact, I have found, especially in writing, sometimes in illustration and other stuff, that the decisions you make while you're going through the process of creation are things that you would have never thought of if you were just sitting down and kind of mulling it over in your mind a little bit. The actual act of putting it down and getting it out in the world in a permanent form forces you to make certain decisions that just kind of stay nebulous when they're in your mind most of the time. So that will get you past some of those blocks. Just the actual act of doing it will get you past some of those blocks. So don't wait for it to be perfect. All right, so that's enough of the berating you and telling you that you're lazy. I'm not going to do that anymore because I'm lazy. That's the reason I haven't got a whole lot more done. All right. Number 2, and this is one of the bigger ones that has helped me, is keep more than one iron in the fire at a time. And by that I mean have at least a couple of projects going at a time. If you run into a block and you just, I know especially like when I'm drawing, there are times when I'm like, okay, I'm starting to not feel this anymore. All right, I'm not liking the decisions I'm making here. I just have to set it down for a little while. Well, that doesn't mean I have to completely waste the rest of the time that I've set aside for creating something. I can then scoot on over to one of my writing projects or one of my other drawing projects. There's another technique that I'm going to cover here in a minute that will talk about this, but I've got lists of stuff, and if I'm like, oh man, there's a technical issue that's stopping me from doing this, or man, I'm really losing the thread on this, I need to come back to it later. Well, then I can just look at my list and say, okay, where am I at? Yeah, I can do that one. I've got time to make some significant additions to that one. I'll jump on it now. So having more than one project is really handy for overcoming creative blocks. There is one major drawback, and this is one that I run into a lot. I have usually 4 or 5 at least major projects that I'm kind of working on at one time, and it means that some of them take longer to finish than they would otherwise if I never ran into any sort of creative block, I guess. Because, sometimes I'd like to be able to put a video up every week, but I'm also trying to get a game design studio rolling, and I've got to put out product for that. Speaking of which, if you want to check it out, I've got 2 adventures on the Dungeon Masters Guild, Ravenloft Prey of the Black Wolf and Ravenloft Clan of the Black Wolf. And I haven't started it yet, but here in a year or so I should have the last adventure in that trilogy, Ravenloft Den of the Black Wolf, out. Right now I'm working on a Dark Sun accessory that's going to be, of course, completely free because I don't have any rights to sell any Dark Sun stuff, so I'm just doing this for the community. And that's the City-State of Balik, if you're interested in Dark Sun stuff. I've also done a player's guide to Balik already, and it's out there. I'll put a link to it in the description below. I'm also on the Ravenloft side doing a Taroka deck, and I'm about halfway through it, but because I'm not wanting to just do quick, crappy illustrations on them, sometimes a card might take me 10-12 hours to make. So sometimes a card is 2 or 3 days worth of creative time, and sometimes it's less than that. It's usually at least a whole evening worth of creative time that I put into a card. And then I'm doing tokens for people who want to do online gaming, monsters and NPCs and PCs, stuff like that. Because I'm doing all this stuff at once, sometimes it's a couple of weeks before I get back to a project. So because of that, sometimes some of my projects take a while to get done. Hopefully, once I get a few more YouTube followers and once I get set more on doing some of these big projects behind me, I've got one more big project, which is a completely new game that I'm starting, a role-playing game that has to do with, it's going to use cards and dice, and it's going to be something that, if you like anything from Ghostbusters to Men in Black, like the movie Constantine, or like the World of Darkness stuff, especially the first and second edition by White Wolf, to any sort of Monster Hunter, deep lore type of thing, to even Magic the Gathering, because some of the mechanics will have to do with what comes up as you're dealing out of a deck, as far as what you can do, to just all manner of stuff like that. If you like that kind of thing, then hopefully you'll love this, but that's still a couple of years out. But once I get done with the 3 big projects that I'm working on right now, I'm going to concentrate on that primarily. Okay, well that's enough of that and enough of the commercials for my stuff. So let us go on to, let's see, what's number 3. Oh yes, this one's very important. and it has to do with procrastination. One of the excuses for procrastination that I have found that I've told myself many times is, say I get off work and by the time I get home, get settled in, and have had a conversation with my wife, I've only got 3 hours until bedtime. I'm like, well, 3 hours isn't enough time to do anything really significant. So, that's not enough time to do all that. Well, if I do like I did today, and I plan ahead, I knew today I had 5 hours of driving ahead of me, and I was going to get home mid-afternoon. So first thing I did once I got home after putting a couple of groceries away was set up this setup and make sure that the mic worked right, and then I jumped on filming this. So make time for your creative endeavors. Set aside time, even if it's, on your day off. Yeah, you may have to go get the oil changed in the car, you may have to do laundry, you may have to mow the lawn, but that evening set aside 4 or 5 hours, enough time that you feel like that you can actually roll up your sleeves and get something significant done on your creative endeavor, so that just the fact that you're like, well, I barely got time to get started, won't keep you from starting. That'll get rid of that excuse for starting. All right, so let's see, what's number 4 here on my list? Oh yeah, this is one of the ones I was talking about earlier that I would get to, and it is break large projects down into small bits. A large project can be incredibly intimidating. Say you're writing a novel, or in the case of like the 2 adventures that I talked about, or the City-State of Balak, which is kind of staring me in the face right now. It's going to be, those 2 adventures were pushing 200 pages long with all the extra stuff. The adventure themselves was 60, 70 pages, and then all the extra stuff that went with it, because they're kind of campaign expansions, pushed it on out to about 200 pages. This thing that I'm doing, the Dark Sun thing that I'm working on right now, the City-State of Balak, I think it's going to be 115 to maybe 130 pages, kind of depends, I'm not sure yet. Those are big projects, especially considering that I'm doing all the illustrating for them too, drawing all the art. And some of those art projects, especially like the covers, I might spend 20 hours on a cover. So that can be a fairly daunting task to be looking at, okay, now where do I start? So what I do is I've got a whiteboard in my home office, and I've written down projects that I'd like to get to in the next year or 2 on that whiteboard. The projects that are coming up that I want to get to first, I then break down into their component parts. Now some of those component parts I then break down into smaller parts when I jump on them. For instance, with the City-State of Balak, I broke it down into 19 parts, and there's stuff like write Chapter 1, Life in Balak, and then do art for Chapter 1, Life in Balak is another part. Then, write Chapter 2, do art for Chapter 3, 2. Then I get down to stat out NPCs, draw maps, stuff like that are all on there. Do cover art, do back cover. Well, when it comes to each of those, some of those I can break down, and like one of those would be do original monsters, the City-State of Balak, because I plan on putting about 6 new monsters in it. Well, that's one broken down part of it, but that's still several days work. So then I would go into that when I got to saying, okay, I want to tackle that one, and I would say, okay, today I'm going to stat out the monsters, write out their description for this monster and maybe this monster over here. And if I've got time, I may jump on a 3rd monster. It kind of depends on how it's flowing. And tomorrow I'm going to do the art for at least the first 2 monsters. So I'm breaking down this huge project into smaller sub-projects that are easier to psych myself up for and to tackle. And that is true of any job that you do in life. It doesn't have to be a creative endeavor. As my father-in-law is fond of saying, he says, how's a pygmy eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. And the same thing is true of any large project. You can't do, you're going to have to take it on 1 part at a time. So go ahead and plan for that, and it will make it much easier for you to make actual progress. You won't just be sitting there looking at this huge project with your eyes all glazed over. You'll be able to focus on one little bit and put that brick in place. And then it's like, okay, what's next? Now I got to put this brick, and now that I got those 2 bricks, I can put another one on top of them. And before you know it, you have your project done. One more technique that I've found works for me, not only with creative projects, but with any project that I do that's a large project, or even if it's a series of projects. Say I've got a whole day's worth of chores ahead of me. I'm going to do the heavy work, the hard part, the boring part, the tedious part first, and then get to the lighter work or the stuff that I'm more excited about later on. Now you may want to intermix it a little bit, but you want to start out with something that is kind of tedious or hard first, just so that you get it out of the way. You're like, okay, I've got that behind me now. Now I can reward myself with doing this cool part that I've been looking forward to getting to. That will also leave you with a greater sense of satisfaction too. And that way you don't dread, you don't build up that you just kind of tossed aside. You don't have to dread eventually having to get to that, because you went ahead and took care of it already. All right, for right now, that's all I've got. If any of you have techniques or tricks that have worked for you, please leave them in the comments below, because that will help anyone who is having a problem with this. Because, you know, this is just from my experience, a few things that have helped me, but I'm sure this is not a comprehensive list. So please help out your fellow creatives by commenting on what has helped you in the comments below, and I'm sure they'll appreciate it. And once again, if nothing that I said connected and sounded like a good idea, go check out the comments. Hopefully one of your fellow writers, illustrators, sculptors, poets, whatever, have put something down there that will resonate with you. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And until next time, have a great day.